Todd's fixing to tell us about. This is a song called Good Old Mountain Dew. I learned from my uncle. He was a fiddle player. And this song, I think, was originally written in Ireland. It was an old pub drinking song. And it got into the United States, and you're familiar with Grandpa Jones's version. And it came to be Good Old Mountain Dew. So I'll try to sing a couple of verses.
Wow, I'm really impressed to have a crowd this size on a Sunday afternoon when you could be doing so many other things. It just goes to show there's a lot of interest in this topic. I did, I hope I won't be kicked out of the church for doing programs on bootlegging, but this is I think the third time I've done this. And yeah, I come from a family of a combination of teetotalers. My parents have always been, most always have been teetotalers, and but I grew up knowing about a lot of relatives, and I knew that there was this culture of moonshine and bootlegging, and I would just, as a kid, I would hear these little things I wasn't supposed to hear about what the relatives were doing. And one of my earliest recollections is kind of a sad one. I had an uncle. He was in his 30s, never married. He lived just a couple of blocks away on Holloway Street, and I used to visit my great-grandfather lived to be in his 90s, and I used to visit him here in Durham when I was a little kid back in the late 60s, early 70s, and this was his son. And we would sit on the porch, and Uncle Cheryl would always, he'd like to pick on the little kids and tease me and pick me up and pinch me and stuff like that. Well, one day, one evening, we were eating dinner. This was in Johnston County at my home, and we got a phone call, and my grandmother happened to be at our house, and we were all eating together, and this was her baby brother, and she jumped up from the table in hysterics and ran off, and I later found out that Uncle Cheryl had gotten a hold of some poison liquor. He enjoyed the moonshine, but there was a time when they started adding ingredients that were toxic, and sometimes they overdid it, and he got a bad batch, and Uncle Cheryl died in his 30s. So there are some sad stories associated with it, but there are also some very interesting, intriguing, even funny sometimes, stories associated with this industry, and it's the funny, intriguing, interesting that we want to focus on today. And I've asked, so I don't become a big talking head up here, I've asked several people in the audience to come up here and read some passages. What I want to do is let the people who experienced a lot of this history tell it to you from their viewpoint. So I'm going to have a lot of readings from different people who were on both sides of the law in the bootlegging story. I will give you, to begin with, a little bit of background. I'll tell you what, before I do that, I need to shamelessly do another commercial for the Ava Gardner Museum. If you've never been to the Ava Gardner Museum in Smithfield, North Carolina, you really should go. We have people every day who come off 95 that say they've been passing the billboards for years, and they finally decided to stop in, and they're just amazed at what they see. It's very professionally done. Ava Gardner's story is, it's a fairy tale story that started in Johnston County back in the 1920s and 30s. Very interesting story, and of course what happened in Hollywood and in Spain and England in her career also add a lot to the story. But it's very well done. It's a great story. She's a beautiful lady. It's amazing. The men enjoy the Ava Gardner Museum as well as the women, because there are pictures of this beautiful movie star everywhere. So and after a year, I still haven't gotten tired of looking at her. She was a beautiful lady. Maybe the day will come when I do, but the commercial I would like to make is for our annual Ava Gardner Festival. This would be a good excuse for you to go to the museum. October the 5th through the 7th, actually on Saturday the 6th and Sunday the 7th, we have an annual festival. This year we're focusing on her connection with Gregory Peck. We're showing Gregory Peck Ava Gardner movies in the theater on Saturday, and then we're showing To Kill a Mockingbird on Sunday afternoon. This is the 50th anniversary of the release of To Kill a Mockingbird, so that's going to be on Sunday afternoon. The movies are first come, first served basis, but we would love to see you in Smithfield October the 6th and 7th for our Ava Gardner Festival. So enough about that. Back to moonshining and bootlegging. There are different accounts of how corn liquor got its start. Of course, we know that the Indians were the ones who introduced the European settlers to corn. Some people say the Jamestown settlers figured out how to distill it, you know, how to make the corn liquor. Other people say it was the Scotch-Irish that came later that actually discovered how to do it. I'm not sure. I haven't done a detailed study of that. Maybe some of you have. But at some point, they learned how to turn maize into a very potent beverage. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And everybody pretty much did what they wanted to, made as much and consumed and sold as much as they wanted to until the 1790s. After the Revolutionary War, Alexander Hamilton came up with this bright idea about an excise tax on liquor to help the new nation finance the government. And it was terribly unpopular in certain areas like Pennsylvania and North Carolina. It was so unpopular that people here in Pennsylvania refused to pay the tax. And so President Washington sent out troops to Pennsylvania, and that was called the Whiskey Rebellion. And we had a Whiskey Rebellion here in North Carolina, but Washington knew that the opposition was so great here that he needn't send any troops down here. So apparently no troops were ever sent to North Carolina. They left us alone. But that was kind of the beginning of bootlegging in North Carolina back in the 1790s. And after the Civil War, there was kind of a resurgence of this taxation business. At the beginning of the Civil War, the federal government decided they needed a revenue source for the Union Army, and so there was another tax on liquor, very high tax. And of course, people resisted after the war down south. Of course, you know, the South, we weren't part of what was going on in the Union during the 1860s. But anyway, after the war, there was a lot of opposition to the federal tax on liquor. It was very high. I think it was like over $1 per pint. I mean, it was just astronomical what they were expecting people to, or maybe a gallon, I'm sorry. Anyway, it was extremely high for the 19th century. Zeb Vance, who was a governor of North Carolina, later became a U.S. senator in the 1870s. He lobbied really hard to do away with the tax altogether, and he became very popular in North Carolina. And anybody who studies genealogy, if you look in the old census records, you'll see just about every family had a boy named Zeb back after the Civil War, and that's why, because Zeb was the hero of the liquor people. So there you go. Well, as you know, as time went on, church ladies and other people decided that there was just too much liquor flowing and that they needed to get rid of it altogether. And they organized, and boy did they organize. And they had meetings and lectures and got people all revved up about prohibition. And in 1881 there was a referendum in North Carolina. It was soundly defeated, but there was a referendum to just prohibit the manufacture and sale of distilled beverages. Now, wine was not included in that, but it did not pass. In 1908, prohibition finally did pass statewide in North Carolina. Of course, by that time, there had been these local legislation laws that had pretty much eliminated liquor in a lot of communities in North Carolina. But the ones that had not followed suit, they fell in line in 1908. And I'm wondering if anybody knows, if anybody can name the top 4 counties that opposed prohibition in 1908. I bet somebody can guess one of them. Johnston was number 1, yes. We were the banner whiskey county in 1908. Number 2 was Wilkes County. Anybody ever heard of Wilkes County in the mountains? Junior Johnson, yeah, you've heard of him. Number 3 was Wake County, and I bet you could probably guess number 4. Durham County was number 4. So what's interesting is that you have Johnston, Wake, Durham. These counties all join each other. There's a steady stream of people, including some of my family, who lived in all 3 counties and kind of moved around. My family all pulled up stakes from Johnston County in the 40s, right after World War II, and they all moved to Durham to get jobs in cigarette factories and other places. So Durham was home to a lot of my family. But yeah, but they came from the bootleg capital, which is Johnston County. But Durham County was not far behind. I want to start off with a reading that goes all the way back to early colonial times. There was actually bootleg liquor. The term bootleg, I understand, comes from the Indian days, the Indian trading days, when there was a time when it was illegal to sell rum or to sell booze to the Indians, and so traders would put it down in their boots. I don't know, it sounds like a good story, but that's where the name bootleg came from. Somebody else might have a different story. There are lots of legends about how that came about. But let's see, you have number 1. I'm going to ask you if you will come and read a passage from John Lawson's journal. Does anybody not know about John Lawson? Well, maybe I should go ahead and tell you. He was an English explorer who came through here in 1701, and was supposed to survey or kind of do a reconnaissance survey of the interior of North Carolina for the Brits, so they could decide if they wanted to colonize. And so he came through here and spent a lot of time with the Tuscarora Indians and the other Indians and wrote about what he saw. So I'm going to let you read one account of a scene that John Lawson experienced.
Smallpox and rum have made such a destruction amongst them that, on good grounds, I do believe there is not the 6th savage living within 200 miles of all of our settlements, as there were 50 years ago. These poor creatures have so many enemies to destroy them that it's a wonder one of them is left alive near us. The smallpox I have acquainted you with above, and so I have of rum, and shall only add that they have got a way to carry it back to the westward Indians, who never knew what it was till within a very few years. Now they have it brought them by the Tuscareros and other neighbor Indians, but the Tuscareros chiefly, who carry it in rundlets several hundred miles amongst other Indians. Sometimes they cannot forbear breaking their cargo, but sit down in the woods and drink it all up, and then hollow and shout like so many bedlamites. I accidentally once met with one of these drunken crews and was amazed to see a parcel of drunken savages so far from any Englishman's house. But the drunken Indians I had in company informed me that they were merchants and had drunk all their stock, as is very common for them to do. But when they happen to carry it safe, which is seldom without drinking some part of it and filling it up with water, and come to an Indian town, those that buy rum of them have so many mouthfuls for a buckskin, they never using any other measure, and for this purpose, the buyer always makes choice of his man, which is one that has the greatest mouth, whom he brings to the market with the bowl to put in. The seller looks narrowly to the man's mouth that measures it, and if he happens to swallow any down, either through willfulness or otherwise, the merchant or some of his party does not scruple to knock the fellow down, exclaiming against him for false measure. Thereupon the buyer finds another mouthpiece to measure the rum by, so that this trading is very agreeable to the spectators, to see such a deal of quarreling and controversy as often happens about it, and is very diverting.
Thank you so much. You can keep that if you like as a consolation prize. Well, now we're going to move ahead several years, about a century, and I'm going to read you a story about a lady who was a blockader. That's what a lot of these people were called, blockaders, or bootleggers, or moonshiners were called blockaders. This lady lived not too far from here, just across the line in Wake County, between Durham and Wake Forest, in a little place called the Harricans. Has anybody ever heard of the Harricans? Okay, all right. And I have a feeling there might be some of that business still carried on there. Yeah, that's what I understand. And by the way, there's a lot of that business still going on in Johnston County. So it's, yeah, it hasn't gone away. This lady's name was Huldah Nines. This was sometime around 1900. This is between the failed attempt at prohibition and the successful attempt at prohibition in 1908. This was from, it was a clipping I found that was not labeled, so it's from a Raleigh paper, we're pretty sure, around 1900. Huldah Nines, a white woman, pleaded guilty to running a blockade still and was sentenced at the recent December term of the United States Court in this city to 2 years in the penitentiary at Nashville, Tennessee, where she now is. The convict is a woman of good sense, but without education, and is a typical moonshiner. She's about 40 years old, and she had on good store clothes. And if she had on good store clothes, would be a comely woman. She appeared before the court wearing an old split bonnet and with a snuff-dipping toothbrush in her mouth, the corners of which were reddened by the snuff she had been dipping. She is about medium height, with light hair, and with rather pleasant features. Her blockade still was successfully hidden from the revenue officers for 10 years. The officers knew there was a still near Hester and Thompson's Mill in the northern part of this county. This portion of the county, which adjoins Granville County, is known as the Dark Corner, and along the banks of the Neuse River there is an immense cane brake, which is known among those who live in the Dark Corner as the Harrican. The land forming the Harrican is uncultivated and is covered by a dense growth of cane, which is from 7 to 10 feet high. That's pretty high. The ground is swampy, and the strip covered with cane is about 3 miles wide and 5 miles long. In this case, canebrake, the moonshiners do a flourishing business all the year round. A public road runs through the west end of the swamp, and at this point 2 men by the name of Hester and Thompson have a mill, which is propelled by the Neuse River. There's a dam across the river about 15 feet high, and Hester and Thompson do a thriving business grinding corn and wheat, sawing lumber and ginning cotton. For years, the revenue officers have been searching for a blockade still near this mill. They have found several places where stills had been set up and run, but they had been pulled out when the officers got there. They had raided every foot of land for a mile around the mill without finding any signs of a still. And then one day, during the month of November last, revenue agents Starkey Hare and Dr. Perkins were raiding near the mill, and they found many wild ducks on the river. The agents concluded that they would kill ducks for a few days. While they were ambushed on, that's exactly what that says, on the banks, they observed that the ducks were continuously eating something that appeared to be on the top of the water. Investigation proved this to be bran from cornmeal, and it appeared to have been cooked. Hare and Perkins were hunting below the mill, and they at once concluded the bran came from the slop of a still which was being emptied into the river. This is a really bad copy, I'm sorry. I thought I had memorized most of this. Again, the search began for the still without success. The officers came to Raleigh because their presence was generally known in the neighborhood. They went back immediately, and by another route, they could not find any, I'm going to have to skip that word, about the mill dam, but immediately below the dam, they found bran. For this reason, they were satisfied the still was connected in some way with the mill house. This structure is of wood, 2 stories high, with chimney at the end near the dam. In cold weather, the mill house is heated by a huge fire made of wood. The officers had before this hid themselves in the woods some distance away from the mill, and watched with their glasses all who went to the place. They had seen Holden Nines go in and remain a short time and come out, but they had never seen any kegs or barrels brought away from the mill. For days at a time, the river would show no signs of bran. Then again, bran would be seen on the surface of the water for several consecutive days, but the officers could not find whence it came. In hunting up and down the river, they found what appeared to be a landing place. A further examination of the water exposed several kegs. One of these was taken out and proved to be full of newly made corn whiskey. It was put back, and none of the kegs were molested. The dam across the river is about 15 feet high and about 80 yards long. Water pours over the dam all the time. Hare and Perkins returned at night to the mill house, effected an entrance themselves, and awaited developments. This was early in the night. They well, I have to skip over that. In the mill until nearly daylight, no one came. They left the mill and hid themselves in the woods, and all day watched the structure with their glasses. Early in the morning, they saw the miller, a man by the name of Ray, and Holden Nines go into the mill. They observed the miller during the day, but did not see Nines again until nearly dark, when she came out of the mill and went off in the direction of her home, which was about 2 miles from the mill. During the day, the chimney had been giving out a continuous, heavy, black, angry smoke. As it grew dark, the officers moved up near the mill, and their long vigil was rewarded by seeing Nines return and unlock the mill and go in. The officers thought they had her now. After waiting a few minutes, they effected an entrance as before and went in and searched everywhere, but failed to find her. They could not imagine what had become of Miss Nines. She had vanished. They remained until nearly daylight, and then left and hid again in the woods. As they left the mill house, they noticed that there was no fire in the chimney place. When it became light, they were surprised to see a heavy black smoke rolling out of the top of the chimney. They were certain now that there was some other connection with the chimney, but where was it? They had critically examined the mill house before that day. It was built alongside of the river and into the hill. The chimney foundation was down even with that of the mill house, and was put up against the hill, and was simply an ordinary chimney. From where the top of the ground struck the chimney to the foundation of the mill house was 15 feet. The dam was built in the usual way to a rise of 15 feet, and then to prevent logs from catching on the dam, a plank bed 6 feet wide was built to aid the logs over the dam. About sundown of the second day, Miss Nines was seen coming out of the mill again. As soon as it was dark, the officers effected an entrance and awaited events. In about 2 hours, Miss Nines and a man by the name of Tilly came into the mill. The officers did not disturb them, but watched to see where they went. They went down to the foundation of the mill and walked along beside the forebuoy and through the water as it poured over the dam and then under the dam and then disappeared and did not return. The officers remained in the mill until nearly daylight and then returned to the woods. Early in the morning, Nines and Tilly came out and went off. As soon as it was dark, the officers went into the mill and went under the dam. As soon as they got under the dam, they noticed in the hill something that looked like a door. But it was securely locked and the officers could not get it open. Here was a defeat. What now to do? The officers as yet had no tangible evidence of a blockade still. They went back into the mill and wet some flour into a paste and took an impression of the keyhole and then returned to the city of Raleigh. Very crafty. Immediately they had a key made from the impression, and taking T.F. Brockwell, a locksmith, with them, they returned to the scene of their search. They found the river full of ducks and the water covered with cornbread. From this sign the officers knew that the still must be running in full blast. They watched all day from the hill and saw the black heavy smoke pouring out of the chimney. About night, Nines and Tilly came out and went off. The officers and Mr. Brockwell tried the key and Mr. Brockwell had made. It did not fit, but after considerable labor with Brockwell's tools, the key did its work and showed an entrance under the ground. Well, I'm not going to read the rest of this, but Hilda Nines was quite a lady. She had a boyfriend, actually, that she was running this thing all by herself pretty much, but she had a boyfriend who was in Central Prison at the time who had been helping her, and he was hiding out somewhere because she had helped him escape. She went to visit him at the prison, and she had worn several layers of clothes, and when she left the prison, she, of course, had taken a layer of clothes and given it to Mr. Pierce. That was her boyfriend, and it was a dress. So Mr. Pierce escaped from the prison in a dress along with Hilda Nines, and he was hiding out. They were also looking for him. Well, they finally caught her, and she went away to prison. I did a little bit of research in the census records and found out she did have a little boy, and apparently he was adopted out, and we don't know if she died in prison or whatever, but the little boy seems to have been adopted, and the trail on Hilda Nines grows cold after this arrest. But that happened just down the road. There were a lot of people who were very inventive and crafty when it came to hiding their stills, because they were determined that they were not going to be caught. During the Depression years, when people were losing everything they had, times were really tough, and people had to be really creative on ways to earn a living. And as it turned out, when Prohibition was passed, there was a huge demand for liquor, and a lot of people, if they were brave enough to get in the business, they could really make some money and really have a higher quality of life than a lot of their neighbors who struggled along. In Johnston County, there was a family named Flowers back in the 20s that lost their farm during the Depression. And a lot of people think that the Depression started in 1929. It didn't. In the South, we had a depression from the early 1920s on. There was a severe agricultural depression, and a lot of people in the early 20s and mid 20s lost their farms and lost businesses, that type of thing. A lot of people went bust. But the Flowers brothers' parents lost their farm. They had a sizable farm up in the northern part of Johnston County, headed toward Wilson, and those brothers were determined that they were going to get the family farm back, and the best way to make money back in those days was to make liquor. So the Flowers boys got in the business and started making liquor, and in just a few years they had bought the farm back. The very same farm that their parents had lost, they bought the farm back and got it back in the family. And several decades later, one of the brothers, Percy Flowers, had not only gotten that one farm, but he had gotten probably 100 other farms. He was a big-time operator. Joshua Percy Flowers, his nephew, and I go to the same church. In fact, I saw him this morning. I didn't tell him that I was coming here to do this program. He was, anyway. I should have brought him along. I bet he has some stories. His dad was one of the brothers that was involved with Mr. Percy. But Percy became known as the King of the Moonshiners. Saturday Evening Post did this article in 1958 called The King of the Moonshiners. And I'm going to pass it around because it's got some interesting pictures. I didn't have any digital photographs of Mr. Percy. So I'll just kind of pass this around and let you take a look. But he was a real legend and still is a legend in not just Johnston County, but all over the South. A lady told me she took a tour group up to New York City, and they were in a restaurant one night, and somebody asked where they were from, and they said they were from Johnston County, North Carolina. Percy Flowers, I know him. Some fancy restaurant in New York City, and this guy, the waiter, knew Percy Flowers, or knew of him. And when they ordered drinks, he says, well, I just want you to know this is not any of that Percy Flowers stuff. Anyway, I'll start this right here. I'm going to read you a story from, I told you I was going to give you both sides of the law. There's a federal agent named Joseph Carter who has written a couple of books. One is Damn the Alligators, and the other one, that was in 1989. He has a chapter on Percy Flowers. He spent quite a while investigating Percy Flowers back in the 60s. And then another one that was published in 1999, Shortcuts to Justice. So this is from Joe Carter. In the early 1960s, I was a special criminal investigator assigned to what I refer to as the racketeering squad of ATF, U.S. Treasury. I was given the responsibility of investigating Flowers. From the time I joined ATF, I heard of Flowers' reputation. At my initial briefing, I learned that he was on the original list of 20 most important leaders of organized crime in the United States, a list created by U.S. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy. I told you he was big time. With the support and assistance of many others, one being a disabled black veteran of World War II, I launched an all-out investigation. The black veteran, Don Wiggins, was a man of great courage who was born and raised in the area owned by Flowers. And I do mean he owned the area. He became disabled in combat during the Pacific Campaign. Although Wiggins had known Flowers all of his life, he never became involved in the liquor business. At this time, Don was about 40 years old with a wife and several small children to support. His only income was a small pension from the Army. The government paid rewards for valuable information. The quality of the information and the importance of the violator determined the amount of the award. During my first secret meeting with Don, I laid out the blunt facts. The federal government wanted badly to develop a first-rate criminal case against Percy Flowers and would pay through the nose for the right kind of assistance. This meant his working undercover to gain employment and the confidence of Percy Flowers. To my surprise and delight, he immediately agreed. I met frequently with Don over the next several weeks, teaching him how to wear a hidden recorder and many other necessary techniques. He understood that if he succeeded, he would have to testify in federal court. Wiggins was an immediate success. Over a period of 18 months, we developed a powerful conspiracy case, including a multitude of substantive cases involving the syndicate's employees and co-conspirators. Flowers was tried in the Wilmington Division of the U.S. Eastern Judicial Court District of North Carolina in 1965. Although Wilmington was selected because it was the farthest federal court location from Flowers' home area, we failed to obtain a conviction there. The jury was deadlocked and the judge declared a mistrial. We had enough evidence to convict the Pope. This experience confirmed the legend that Percy Flowers could never be convicted by a jury in North Carolina. Let me finish reading this. I know the time is getting short. Upon entering the service of any government law enforcement agency in those days, one would invariably hear of the notorious J. Percy Flowers, the King of the Moonshiners. Never would an agent be told what I learned through my experience in tracking him for years. There was another side that was a real paradox. Flowers was married for life to a good lady who was respected by all. I have never heard a negative comment about her from anyone with whom I came in contact. Only praise for her character, good neighborliness, and family values, and her name was Miss Delma. I got to meet Miss Delma one time. They had 2 children. The older was a son, the younger a daughter named Rebecca. It was common knowledge that Flowers would not involve any family member in his illegal enterprise under any circumstances. Part of the legend of J. Percy Flowers was that his only son grew up with good values, totally sheltered from any illegal activities. He graduated from the University of North Carolina and entered law school. Tragically, he was killed when his private airplane crashed on the way home to Johnston County from Chapel Hill. Percy's only remaining child, Rebecca, was still a small child when I retired from ATF. It is my understanding that she is now married, the mother of twin boys. She owns and operates the family farms and a large retail store offering a wide variety of merchandise, among other interests. And they have the best hot dogs in the world. She is well educated and respected, an asset to the community, a brilliant business executive who obviously inherited her mother's character and her father's intelligence. Wow. And she is still going strong. Becky Flowers is kind of an icon of her own in Johnston County. I wish I had time to share some of these other stories. I do have, do we have time for just a few more? What is my deadline? Okay, good, because I have Mr. Phillips wanted to share something with us also, so I want to give him some time. There's a gentleman, I wish I could have gotten in touch with him and brought him along. I'm sure he would have loved to have come, but he worked for Percy Flowers back as a young man, and he also worked for a guy named Jim Thornton, who used to have a TV show on WTVD. Has anybody ever heard of Jim Thornton? Okay, and I bet some of you used to watch his show back in the 50s. I think it was in the 50s. He would really embarrass people. He would talk about his home folks from Johnston County and tell everything he knew, and probably some people never spoke to him again. But anyway, it was a wildly popular show, I understand.
And he would get drunk and eat dog food on the air.
Yeah, okay. You're going.
Right, this is Mr. Marvin Underwood again. Okay, can you hear me? When I was running from the feds, and they would run me for hours, sometimes until 4 o'clock in the morning, I knowed the roads, and they did. One night I ditched them and went home and sat on the porch in the dark and watched them run up and down the road. Later the next week, they come after me again. I was coming out of Brogdon, just south of Smithfield. I was on the Brogdon Road, and they took off after me. They didn't know the roads, but I did. I cut down the side road. In them days, they were all dirt, and I slung nasties to make the way dusty where they couldn't see. In a few seconds, I seen their lights turn upside down. They rolled over in the ditch because they couldn't see. In those days, the 1950 model cars didn't get hurt much, maybe just scratched, because they were all so well made. I went on into Smithfield on this 301 intersection in 70. I stopped at an Exxon station and asked the man, could I wash my car? I had a 53 Ford Crestliner that was hopped up. Well, in the meantime, a wrecker had gone to get the feds, and they pulled into that station. I was in washing my car, and they put it on the lift to see if there was anything wrong with it, and I asked, what happened? They said, we was running a moonshine. He was slinging around on the dirt road making dust, and we couldn't see him. We rolled in the ditch. Well, we're going to get him one day. We had to let him go tonight. I never did crack a smile. And this says, in parentheses, spoken while giggling wildly.
I'm going to now call on Mr. Phillips. He has been doing some research on a local, is it a local Durham County? Bootlegger, and he's written a song about him, so he's going to close out for us, and then I'll take some questions if anybody has a question.
Named Country Boy, and he would come on at 6 o'clock in the morning with the little yell, "Yahoo! This is the old Country Boy," and then he would proceed to give an account of Sonny Buck. Oh, Sonny Buck, he outran the law last night. He's back home again, probably laying in bed asleep. And Sonny Buck Ridge was born William Ralph Clements He was adopted by John Riggs, and John Riggs was a man who made moonshine in northern Durham County, and it was said that he made and sold 1,000 gallons of moonshine in one day. Sonny Butt started driving a 1940 Ford Coupe with no back seat in it, and of course the engine had been altered. They put a Columbia rear end in it, and for nearly 3 decades he outran 79 warrants for his arrest, was finally caught in the mid-60s in a sting operation on Roxborough Road, went to the pen, federal pen for a year and a half, came out, and the very night he came out, he made a run of liquor from northern Durham County up to Richmond, Virginia. He was caught again in the 70s. While he was at the train station, his stepdaddy or his father paid enough money to keep him out. He went straight and bought a trucking company in Durham, and he hauled rocks for a living. And I asked his brother, Ben Riggs, I happen to be married into the family. The Riggs are in-laws to me. My sister is a Riggs. And I asked Ben, who was his stepbrother, I said, I understand Sonny Butt went straight and had this trucking company, Clements Trucking, Hauling. He said, Ron, he said, let me tell you something. He said, the rocks were on top. The good stuff was underneath. And so we've done some research about Sonny Butt, and Shuler has written a song, and we want to probably just close this out by remembering a guy that was the king, original king of speed. We call him Hell on Wheels. Had an unusual ability to elude the law, and went from a 40 Ford Coupe to a 1956 Ford that actually put a Cadillac engine in, and we've talked to the mechanics and everything. So, anything you want to say?
Myself and my cousin Ed Freeman wrote this song, and it's called The Legend of Sonny Butt Riggs. Can you hear me okay? All through the 1940s and up past 52, Sonny Buck in his fast forward showed the law a thing or two. Flying down the highway, fled out in second gear, a trunk full of moonshine and a grin from ear to ear. Light it up, Sonny Buck, law's on your tail. Pick it up, Sonny Buck, get caught and go to jail. Hang her in that curve, boy, don't let her leave the road. Speed it up, Sonny Buck, you gotta haul that load. Police tried to hem him in the back roads of his flight, but he was much too fast. He'd slide right past their sides with that old Ford screaming as she whistled by. Good old Sonny Buck had laughter in his eyes. Light it up, Sonny Buck, law is on your tail. Pick it up, Sonny Buck, get caught and go to jail. Hang her in that curve, boy, don't let her leave the road. Speed it up, Sonny Buck, you gotta haul that load. With jamming gears and gravel a-flying and making the rubber burn. 100 plus on the straightaway after making the bootleg turn. White lightning and fast forward was his way of life. Moonshine and big V8s, it's time to run tonight. Light it up, Sonny Buck, law's on your tail. Pick it up, Sonny Buck, get caught and go to jail. Hang her in that curve, boy, don't let her leave the road. Speed it up, Sonny Buck, you gotta haul that load.
Now he's no longer with us, he's in the promised land. We're only left with memories of that driving man. But when you see a shooting star on a Carolina night, it could be that wild Bahama boy flying out of sight. Light it up, Sonny Buck, law's on your tail. Pick it up,
Sonny Buck get caught and go to jail. Hang her in that curve, boy, don't let her leave the road. Speed it up, Sonny Buck, you gotta haul that load. I said, hang her in that curve, boy, don't let her leave the road. Speed it up, Sonny Buck, you gotta haul that load.
Well, this has been fun. Does anybody, I know we're a little over the schedule here, but if anybody has a burning question, something that you would like to know, I'll be glad to try to answer.
I'm just wondering if Scott Riggs, the truck driver,
Yes, yes,
the lady,
yes. That's his nephew. Yes,
he rigged the Riggs and Trout construction.
yes.
That's all.
Yeah, all part of the same thing.
Yes, sir.
My wife told me he's going to have free samples if I can.
Oh, well, this is the closest thing to white lightning you'll get today, sorry. I tell you what, if you come to the Ava Gardner Museum, we sell moonshine jelly. We'd be happy to sell you some. And it's tax paid.
Growing up in the North in the 50s, I was born in 45, there used to be a show on Saturday afternoons of stock car racing and demolition derby, but they never made the connection, never told us where it comes. I said, how come all these drivers are from North Carolina? I was jealous. How comes all of North Carolina?
That's why. That's how it all got started. Yes, sir.
I'm a bootlegger's nephew.
Ah.
Now, he ran a Model T Ford that his siblings bought and gave to my grandparents, and he took it and he ran it right into the ground running moonshine. A lot of the moonshine was sort of made around the borders of our property. My grandparents wouldn't put up with making it on the property. This is West Virginia. It's about 3,300 feet of altitude.
Seems to be a good place to make it in the mountains. Yes, ma'am.
I was confused. I thought big time North Carolina bootleg was the mountains. But you said the top 3 counties. Well, Wilkes is number 2.
Yeah.
So how did it come so far to the Piedmont?
Oh, I can answer that.
Okay.
I'd like it.
Go ahead. Okay, go ahead. Oh, the question was, it was her impression that it was bigger business in the mountains than it was here in this part of North Carolina.
As far as Sonny Buck is involved, if you'll think back, during World War II, we had Camp Butner. And I am a retired police officer with Durham. And I used to hear the old folks, the old cops talk about during World War II that Durham was set up to entertain the soldiers coming in on Friday and Saturday night from Camp Butner.
Okay.
And so Sonny Buck got his start doing that time, running shine, doing that time, and it just carried over.
Yeah, you had to have
that might have been
right.
It really got started.
You had to have a demand for it, and the demand was in the cities, places where people couldn't make it or they couldn't hide out and make no.
They did it in
Oh,
County.
oh yeah, they made it and sold it, but but there was a lot of demand from city folks for it. So yeah, they ran it all over the place. Yeah, but it was made for some reason. Johnston, Wake, and Durham counties seem to be kind of the headquarters of a lot of the moonshiners.
Well, you had the Paul River. You had a lot of water sources running through this area too, also.
And a lot of forests and swamplands where people could hide out and do it covertly. Yeah. Any other questions?
The Clements that you mentioned, are they related to Clements Funeral?
Oh, I'm not sure.
I don't think so, and I think the name is spelled Clemons.
Okay. Yeah, my mother-in-law was a Clement from Granville County, up near Oxford, Creedmoor area, but that's a different name altogether, a different family. Yeah.
Sonnybuck was adopted. I mean, he was adopted when he was like 4 or 5 years old. Into the
Right, okay. All right, another question.
How exactly did they make it?
There's a website that I found that tells you how you can make it. You can even use your credit card and order. You can order a still and make your own. I think it's called whiskeyskill.net. You do a Google search on the internet on moonshine. There's a website. They sell copper stills, and they're not all that expensive. I would think it'd be astronomical, but they run from like $200 to $400, and you can get set up your. Yeah, it was cooked. Somebody that knows more about the process will have to tell you more about that.
It is a very complex thing.
Yeah.
And it's an art to actually making it. We made it in school.
What school did you
We had a chemistry teacher that let us make a little bit of it, and it is hard to get it right. I mean, he told us step by step how to do it, and it's kind of do it until you get it right kind of a thing.
Where'd you go to school?
Yeah.
Southern High School.
Right here in Durham County. I want to read one little quote. I was doing some internet research, just trying to find little tidbits about Durham County moonshine history, and I found, where did it go? There was some sort of real estate magazine published in Cleveland, Ohio, 1921, called The Realty Record, that picked up this little blurb. Protect home industries. The plain dealer of the 13th instant carried a dispatch from Durham, North Carolina, relating to the troubles of a bootlegger, who on appearing before the judge stated he was going to quit bootlegging. When asked what he meant, he declared, "The great number of bootleggers in Durham County made it necessary that they wear badges to distinguish the salesman from the customers." And it's funny, the little quote ended with, "Comment would ruin this." So there's no further explanation. Thank you. You've been a wonderful audience, and I really appreciate you having me here today. Thank you.